Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 15, the Respiratory System. I would prefer to be giving you this lecture face-to-face, but because of the coronavirus, here is the best case scenario. So hopefully you get the information and the nice little tidbits I have makes the information easier to digest. So we're going to go through the slides like we would if we were in class face-to-face. So with the respiratory system, first we've got to start off with its functions. The functions of the respiratory system are to make sure that we're bringing oxygen into the alveoli, but particularly to the air sacs of the lungs or your alveoli. Then, something we should be relatively familiar with thus far, we want to eliminate carbon dioxide or the waste product for gas exchange by working directly with your cardiovascular system in both pulmonary and systemic circulations, which you all were just tested on. If we then take a look further at the respiratory system, we then need to examine the parts that make it up. So here's a nice diagram of all of the individual portions or pieces. We can break it up into two separate tracts. The first is going to be our upper respiratory tract, made up of our nose, nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, and upper trachea. All of these things relatively important, and if you take a look at the diagram, they're really from the top of the lungs up. When we take a look at the lower respiratory tract, we're looking at the lower trachea, so the pieces that will actually enter into the lungs, so they're equal or equivalent to really the location of the lungs. The lungs themselves, and then the bronchial tubes and alveoli that are found within. Around your lower respiratory tract, we're going to see pleural membranes as well as respiratory muscles. Your pleural membranes are going to surround and help protect as well as keep lubricated both lungs as they inflate and deflate throughout the entirety of our lives. And then when we say respiratory muscles, we're talking about the diaphragm or that dome-shaped muscle that sits up and underneath the rib cage, as well as your intercostal muscles, both internal and external. So these are the muscles that weave in, out, through, and around your ribs to make sure that they expand and move similar to that of the lungs. As always, or as is typical, I provided you with a link to give you another look at the respiratory system if you are simply tired of hearing my voice and are looking for additional time apart. Go ahead and click the link. Otherwise, this might be a really good tool as we gear up for the test later on. If we look at each of these individual portions of the respiratory tract, or at least the upper portion, let's take a look at the nose and nasal cavity. The nose and nasal cavity is meant for air to enter and leave the respiratory system when we're at homeostasis or when we have good health. This is its main function. Obviously, if we become sick or ill, you can become congested, right? One nostril works, the other one doesn't. And luckily, we have the ability to breathe through the mouth. But that is not what your mouth is designed for in theory. Your nose or nasal cavity is. As air enters the nose or nasal cavity, it has the ability to be warmed to about body temperature, moistened to a humidity of almost 100% because, well, the internal structures of your body are, for lack of a better term, wet. And then lastly, we want to filter out any dust or any particle that's making its way into the body. Any foreign invader, any bacteria, any pathogen that's there, we want to make sure that we grab onto it and we don't send it down to those air sacs or your alveoli. Next up, we have your pharynx. You and I know the pharynx as the throat. It can be divided into three overall portions. Your nasopharynx, naso for nose. If you take a look at the location, it really is at the back of that nasal cavity. And because of this, it is a passageway for only air. We then have an oropharynx. Your oropharynx, oro meaning oral cavity, so this is going to be found at the back of the throat. And then we have the laryngopharynx. This is a passageway which is unique because here we see exchange of both air, and food. So depending on what you're doing, if you're enjoying a meal or you're in the process of running to warm up for an activity, it's going to perform the necessary function accordingly. Within your pharynx, we also see sound resonate from your vocal cords. So this is what allows us the ability to project or to be relatively quiet and whisper to a friend when you think the teacher can't see you talking to your pal. As we move on, we then see your larynx. Your larynx, you and I typically know as your voice box. So this is what has our vocal cords present. However, it's not just the voice box, it's a passageway for air between your pharynx and the trachea. So it's kind of the in-between. Your larynx has to be open at all times. Otherwise, we see overly large problems breathing. Because of this, it's made mostly of cartilage, and a reminder, cartilage is made mostly of water, which makes it very resilient. The thyroid cartilage is the largest portion of the larynx, and fun fact, this is what creates and gives males the Adam's apple. We also see in this area your epiglottis, which is the uppermost part of the cartilage. This is what's responsible from keeping food from entering your trachea or your windpipe. So your epiglottis is really going to be the nice little changing of the railroad tracks. If you're in the process of eating, it's going to divert food off and into your esophagus. If you're in the process of breathing, it's going to make sure that then that air makes its way into the trachea. And as mentioned, you and I call this area the voice box. The reason being is we've got vocal folds that are pulled across the larynx and vibrate to make the sound that resonates in your pharynx. Your trachea, as we continue to move down this nice little tube, is about 4 to 5 inches in length and will extend from your larynx or voice box to your bronchi. It's surrounded by nice C cartilages, which you're about to see pop up on this nice diagram. The reason they're called C cartilages is because, well, they're in the shape of a C, or another way to look at it, they are in the shape of a U. Depending on your size and stature, so your height really, we typically see anywhere from 16 to 20 of these cartilages, and their whole point or purpose is to keep the trachea open to make sure that that tube always allows air to enter into the lungs. Because it has to continually remain open, it has to have an additional line of protection, which is why we see it lined with mucus produced by goblet cells, and along with those goblet cells, they have those nice hair-like extensions or cilia. Their whole purpose, as a reminder, when we think mucus, is to, well, help filter the air as it moves through the lungs. So again, any pathogen, any allergen, anything that doesn't belong in the lungs other than oxygen is going to get picked up and trapped here. Your bronchial tubes then extend off of then your trachea, and they're divided into right and left primary bronchi. These are the actual structures that physically enter into your lungs. Similar to that of the larynx, they are surrounded by C cartilages, still lined with mucus and cilia, and they are the primary defense, again, against things foreign to the body. As your primary bronchi enter into the lungs, they branch off into smaller and smaller portions known as secondary bronchi. The way I would like to explain this is these are like branches on a tree. You've got the trunk, and then you've got those really big branches that grow off of the trunk. But then on those individual branches, you might see additional extensions. These secondary bronchi are those additional extensions. Your bronchi will continue, in fact, to branch into smaller and smaller tubes until we get the smallest possible piece, known as your bronchioles. Your bronchioles are relatively unique in the sense of this is going to contain no cartilage and instead is going to be made of smooth muscle lined with simple epithelium. Smooth muscle, as a reminder, is unstriated and it's involuntary with one singular nucleus. So you do not control these. They do not have the same level of protection as the primary bronchi. Therefore, these are more susceptible to injury or more so illness. So right now we're hearing a lot about the coronavirus attacking the respiratory system. So this would be the area that would be most at risk for that virus. It doesn't have a whole bunch of protection. And in fact, this is what researchers and doctors are taking a look at. What kind of damage or what kind of effect does coronavirus have in this area of the body? Your lungs, we've got a left and a right lung located to the right and the left of the heart or off to the lateral sides. At the base of each lung, we're going to see the diaphragm. So again, it's going to sit, that U-shaped muscle, right up and underneath. Inside your lungs, we see then those alveolar sacs or your alveoli, which are kind of cup-shaped pouches. The examples I gave you in class are those water balloon bunches that you kind of screw on and you blow up a whole bunch of water balloons at the same time, or a bunch of grapes. Each of your lungs consists of millions upon millions of these. And for the amount of them, they cover about 700 to 800 square feet of surface area. So they do a very good job of making sure we can exchange gases, oxygen for carbon dioxide. 2 or more alveoli, so 2 or more air sacs, will actually share the same opening, which is known as the alveolar sac. If we take a look at the alveoli in and of itself, these are areas of gas exchange once again. In fact, gas exchange is only going to happen here. Each is lined with epithelium and a thin layer of tissue fluid for the diffusion of gases. Remember, these inflate and deflate similar to that of a balloon. So just like we saw a nice area of fluid around the heart so it could beat continuously throughout our lives, we're going to see that tissue fluid around your alveolar sacs so they can continue to inflate and deflate throughout our lives. That fluid is known as surfactant. It will cover the surface. Surfactant is actually a protein, and it's secreted by your septal cells in order to prevent the alveoli, again, from sticking together. The way this happens is we're going to mix tissue fluid and we're going to decrease the surface tension by permitting inflation. So again, surfactant is just there to make sure your alveoli are lubricated enough to fill and then deflate from the time you take your first breath until the time you take your last. This is the end of our first, I don't know how we would word this, but social distancing lecture. If you have any questions, please email me as is typical. I am going to hold you responsible for this information, and you are going to need it to complete the following worksheets. Otherwise, you will have access to this. You can watch it, rewatch it, whatever you need. Utilize this as a method of studying, whatever helps you. If you need me for any additional clarification for these slides or the information on them, go ahead and let me know. Otherwise, we will be moving off and into the second section of the respiratory system to follow.